We'll go to Tom Nielsen.
It's been 10 months since the no advantage policy and offshore processing were implemented, but people still continue to take desperate journeys by boat, and many of them sadly continue to drown. When will our leaders and our politicians admit that simplistic policy responses of trying to deter and trying to return people are naive and don't work?
Malcolm Turnbull.
Well, I don't know what you mean by simplistic, but the sorry history of this policy is this. When John Howard's government, which I was a member, of course, lost office in 2007, we had not had any significant numbers of boat arrivals for many years. A mix of policies which had evolved over that time, some of which had been inherited from the previous Labor government, had succeeded in stopping the boats, as it were. Kevin Rudd took the view that the thing that caused the boat arrivals to increase or decrease was the situation in the Middle East. It was the push factors. It was what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening in Iran. And we said at the time, no, it's the pull factors. It is Australia's domestic policy. Kevin took the view that was not the case.
You're on the record, Malcolm, saying the push factors are enormous. You are on the record as saying that.
Can you just be quiet?
No, I won't.
They want you to be quiet. The point that I made at the time was that the push factors range from being enormous to very enormous.
Right.
But they are always enormous. And what calibrates the level of arrivals is Australia's domestic policy. Now, Kevin took the view that was not the case. He changed our domestic policy. Labor conducted a social science experiment which has had the consequence of thousands of unauthorised arrivals, hundreds of boats, lives lost, and billions of dollars of money spent on trying to handle it. So it has been. Labor conducted a failed experiment.
Okay,
and that is why you've got to get back to the policies that work. That is the melancholy truth.
That is the point. So the policies that work, according to Tony Abbott, towing back the boats to Indonesia. Will that work when the Indonesian ambassador says you can't do it? When the Indonesian foreign minister says he won't accept that? How will that work?
Well, you can only return boats when it is safe to do so. But the fact is...
What about when the Indonesians agree or don't agree? Well, that's the other factor.
Tony, that may render it unsafe to do so. The fact is, there was a mix of...
That's the uniform position of the Indonesian government.
The thing that Labor cannot escape, they are like a butterfly on a pin on this issue. They are stuck. The truth is... the policies they inherited worked, they changed them, and we are in the mess we are today.
Except everyone, but we're into the next phase now, where everyone wants to know how the coalition is going to deliver on the promise when the Indonesians say they won't take these people back. So how do you think that's going to happen?
Well, look, the bottom line is this, Tony. We had a mix of policies which worked when we were in government.
No, but the fundamental one, towing back the boats, which virtually everybody agrees is the thing that finally stopped them happening. Can you do it
I'm not
if the Indonesians say no? Can you do it if the Indonesians say no?
Tony, look, obviously, if the Indonesian Navy were to intervene in some way to prevent it happening, it obviously wouldn't happen.
No, but what if they just said, you can't do it? They wouldn't have to intervene. They just say, you can't do it, because to bring them in would be like an invasion.
Well, that's not true. That is not true.
If you took them back to Indonesian ports and said,
now
go ashore?
No. The practice that occurred, well, let me put it this way. If you engage in megaphone diplomacy, it won't work, right? But the bottom line is this, that if seaworthy asylum seeker boats are taken back to the limit of the Indonesian territorial waters, escorted back there and then left there, so that their only option is to return to Indonesia, then the Indonesian Navy is not engaged because it is action that is not occurring within Indonesian territorial waters. There's never been any suggestion and there's never been any practice of the Australian Navy escorting asylum seeker vessels through Indonesian waters and tying them up at a wharf in an Indonesian port. So the proposition that you've put to me, you know, with great and grovelling respect due to your magnificence here, is simply not based in fact.
Okay,
it's not factual.
The questioner had his hand up again. Let's go back to you before we bring in the other panellists. Go ahead.
In response to Malcolm, the factors which cause the boats to stop are a lot more complicated than that. At the same time, global applications for asylum dropped. But regardless, this discussion always goes around in the same circle. If those policies had worked, they ought to work now because the current government has very similar policies. What I'd like to know is why we're so focused on trying to deter people or return people or penalise people without looking at what's wrong with what's not working in the channels which we'd prefer them to take, or in the case of Sri Lanka where people come directly, the circumstances which are causing them to flee.
Well, if I could just answer that very briefly, I think...
Yes, you can very briefly, because I want the other panellists to answer.
I think the fundamental problem that you've got is that there are tens of millions of people in the world who are fully qualified as refugees. Let's say if they got to Australia, they would qualify for refugee status. No matter how generous our humanitarian program is, there is always going to be a large number of people who won't be able to get in through the traditional sort of conventional route, and will want to get in under their own steam, as it were. And that is that people smuggling trade, which for all the reasons that I think most Australians now agree on, is one that we've got to work out a way to stop. And therein lies the challenge.
Okay, Craig Emerson.
Well, I've just heard Malcolm astonishingly defend and actually support a policy of towing back boats into Indonesian waters. So far has Tony Abbott dragged the Liberal Party to the right that Malcolm Turnbull, who I consider a decent man, is forced into a policy of supporting towing back boats into Indonesian waters when everyone from right through the system, the most senior ministers, the leadership said they will not tolerate it. Now, to have any response that is effective to this problem, you need the cooperation of Indonesia. You will not get the cooperation of Indonesia if you start towing boats back. We won't do it. You've just defended it. I think it's indefensible. It's dangerous. It's dangerous for the Navy. It's dangerous for the people. When I talk to the head of the Immigration Department and to people in Indonesia from within our embassy, they'll say they'll scuttle them straight away. There'll be people in the water. There'll be people drowning. What do we say? Let them drown? No, we don't tow the boats back.
If it's not safe to tow them back, in the 11 years of the Howard government, there were 6 boats that were escorted back to Indonesian waters. 6. It can only happen when it is safe to do so, and there will be cases where it is not safe to do so.
It's never safe to do so.
But Craig, the problem that we've got is that you guys have created this mess by dumping our policies, and now you're saying that there's no solution to it. So your attitude is you throw your hands up.
We can't get the legislation through the Parliament that you and your colleagues oppose. We cannot get the legislation through the Parliament that you and your colleagues oppose. Now, what happened at around the time of the change of government is that people smugglers learned that of all those people on temporary protection visas, a huge proportion of them were allowed to stay in Australia after being in mandatory detention for a very long period. They then told those who wanted to come by boat, don't worry about it, you'll end up being able to stay in Australia because these TPVs are just a deterrent for a period of time, but if you're patient enough, you'll be able to stay.
Okay, I'm going to pause you two so we can hear from the other panellists.